today we're going to make this Kumiko and epoxy lamp that's also a cabinet. A lampinate? I'm starting with the Kumiko grid, which I'm making out of these basswood strips. They go together with half-lap joints that I cut on the table saw. And if you want to see the process of making these grids in depth, I have a dedicated video that explains it linked in the top right corner. I had a few different ideas for the pattern of the infill, and because this is my entry for the Rockler Bent Wood Challenge, I wanted to incorporate some bent wood. These strips are 1/8 of an inch thick, so off camera I took some light passes with a block plane to make them easier to bend. I don't want them to look thinner than the other strips, so I took off as little material as possible to make the bends. With the pattern done, I move on to making a simple frame out of cherry. I added some glue to the inside of the frame so the Kumiko panel itself can help hold it together. The epoxy is one of the most satisfying but nerve-wracking parts of this build. I covered some plywood with sheathing tape, which the epoxy won't stick to, and secured the Kumiko panel to it using hot glue. I pressed it down with a weight to remove any slight twist to make sure I end up with a flat panel. I'm using Total Boat epoxy and doing 2 different pours. The first is clear, and this will slightly soak in and up the wood, which will prevent the colors from soaking in when I do the second pour. I went with 3 different colors, a light blue, dark blue, and dark green. If you want to try something similar, or if you have an epoxy project in mind, you can use the coupon code JTWoodW10 and get 10% off any product on the Total Boat website. If you try Kumiko with epoxy, tag me on Instagram because I would love to see what you come up with. After the epoxy cured, I removed the panel from the backer board using chisels. I made a bit of a mistake here and accidentally carved out some of the epoxy with the chisel. Luckily, I only cut into the clear layer, and after cleaning out the cut, it was a pretty simple fix and blended in seamlessly. The cabinet portion, or lampshade, depending on how you're looking at it, is made from 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood. To cut the slots on the side of the lamp, I pieced together a circle jig for the router. The 2 main components to get accurate curved slots are the jig itself, where the pin needs to be centered on the workpiece, and the reference edge, which has a ruler attached to it. The workpiece has a mark on it, so I can consistently move it over 1/2 of an inch, which gives me 1/4 inch spacing between the slots, because I'm using a 1/4 inch router bit. To bend this piece, I'm using the kerf bending technique, which is where you take a series of cuts almost all the way through the material. Here, I'm leaving about 1/32 of an inch uncut. I needed to make a full 180-degree bend, which ended up working, but I wish I cut a little deeper on all the cuts to reduce the stress and make it a little easier. On the back of this piece, I drilled holes to help cut the keyhole slots so it could be hung on the wall. A keyhole bit cuts a T-slot into the wood, and the 3 holes I drilled are access ports for the screw heads to enter the slot. Next, I milled up some cherry for the top and bottom of this lamp. I made this template to test and make sure the curves and length were right before tracing it and cutting it out of the final piece. I cut close to the line and refined the shape on a sander. These pieces also got some slots to allow the light to come through them, and I cut those with the router, edge guide, and dead camera battery. I normally do a dry practice run before I do a glue up, and for this piece I did it a couple of times. I used Tip-On Quick and Thick to hopefully fill in some of the kerf cuts and help hold the bend closed, but it also has a shorter working time. Thankfully, only one of the sides gets glued because the other side will function as a live hinge for the cabinet door. Throughout the build, I wasn't sure if I wanted to add a shelf, as I thought it might interfere with the lights and create shadows. I want to minimize the use of metal fasteners in this project, so these screws are used to hold the shelf in place so I can drill out the holes for dowels. Gluing on the door would have been easier to do before I did the kerf bending, but I wanted to make sure that it worked properly and didn't crack. The kerfs came in handy with the glue up. I placed a piece of aluminum in the top and bottom kerfs to clamp the door to the hinge. I used a piece of wood in the center so I wouldn't harm the slots. Off camera, I made these clips to help keep the door closed. Because of the shapes and the slots, I went with a simple to apply finish and used spray lacquer. Once that dried, I fished the LED light strip through one of the slots and placed it in the cabinet in a way that I thought would evenly distribute the light. This project was a bit of a design challenge for me, as I rarely work with curves and bends. Let me know what you think of this light cabinet in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more Epoxy and Kumiko projects, subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you in the next video.